undergone successive waves of competition from Japan, the Asian tigers, and at that point it was China was coming to the fore. So one of the CEOs asked the eminent economist if he thought we really needed to have a manufacturing sector, and he scratched his head and said, well, you know, from an economic perspective, it doesn't matter. So this was sort of equivalent to the 1980s quip by another economist that potato chips, computer chips, what difference does it make? So I want to start by just saying a few words of why I think manufacturing is important. You know, apart from the national defense perspective, it's a non-trivial consideration that we want to not rely on China or Russia, for that matter, for our national defense production. But the economic case, I think, is also less known than it should be. Also, this idea of pessimism about the future of the manufacturing sector has real-world consequences. Amongst other things, it's been hard to recruit students into the fields that are needed for a robust industrial sector. I think Martha talked about the lack of workers for building new chemical plants, working the oil fields as well. Well, so you have students, the educational establishment it seems to be pessimistic about the future of the industry as well, and so is not offering the programs that we need. Capital markets have been more pessimistic about putting money into the sector. So it does have real-world consequences. So why do I think we should have a manufacturing sector, a robust manufacturing sector? It's about 12.5% of output, over $2 trillion. The multiplier effect for output outside of the energy sector for every $1 going into manufacturing is about $1.33. It's less than one for the services sector. It's a center of research, development, and innovation, a source of capital investment, including intellectual property. Innovation in manufacturing animates, especially through the IT sector, services sector. U.S. manufacturers spend about 4% of domestic sales on research and development compared to 2.3% for non-manufacturers. 68% of all business sector spending on R&D is for manufacturing. Productivity, hence growth in living standards, is higher in manufacturing. 1995 to 2011, it was 3.5% on average in manufacturing compared to 1.4% for the entire economy. This helps U.S. competitiveness. Unit labor costs in the manufacturing sector declined by about 1.6% annually from 1995 to 2008. And this helped relatively unit labor costs relative to 14 other leading industrial nations to decline by 40%, thus making the U.S. export sector in manufacturing that much more competitive. Global competition has driven productivity growth and capped unit labor costs. It also contributed to higher standards of living in the United States. Between 1995 and 2011, there was about a 40% increase in the overall price level in the United States, but prices for manufacturing goods were virtually flat, largely because of deflation in high-tech areas, but also restrained growth of prices in highly competed sectors such as autos. It's also worth noting that the energy intensity of industrial production was down by more than 40% since 1997, driven again largely by global competition. Manufacturing is a source of good-paying jobs. It's at least 9% higher than average. Benefits for workers in the sector are much greater than in the services sector, and it employs people who have been forgotten by the American educational system, that is, those who have less than a college education. So There was something of a manufacturing resurgence between, say, 2000, the end of the Great Recession, and very recently. But that being said, there is no, we still haven't attained the level of overall production in manufacturing that we had at the peak of the last cycle. We're about 2% below. The growth has been led by the energy renaissance for a number of reasons that both Martha and Peter have outlined. But also, right now, we're affected by the strong dollar, weak overseas markets, as well as the slowdown in oil and gas. It's notable that capital investment in the United States has been historically weak in this recovery, and that bodes ill for future growth and living standards. And again, the oil and gas sector is key to that. So we've had the discussion of especially natural gas and its impact. I'm going to talk a little bit about oil, but just in general, some of Peter's numbers show that about a third of all energy consumed in the United States goes into the manufacturing sector. So lower prices in gas, especially, have been a wind at the back of the sector. And I would note too that now, since the exploration activity has shifted more towards crude oil, the associated gas that goes with oil production has been keeping gas production growing and keeping prices very, very competitive globally. So energy-intensive industries such as metals, chemicals, paper have received a huge boost from lower gas prices relative to Europe. Relative electricity prices, again related especially to natural gas, are also a wind at the back. These lower prices are a driver of heavy investment by multinationals from Europe and Asia in US autos, heavy equipment, as well as the chemical sector. Oil and gas is also important in manufacturing because much of the equipment and expertise needed from upstream to downstream is domestically sourced from US equipment. Related services and construction are sectors in which the US suppliers are highly competitive in rural markets. And overall mining equipment, to give just one example, and this of course includes oil and gas related production, there are $3 of US exports for every $1 of imports. Compressors, engines, drilling equipment, trucks, turbines, and even steel products, especially tubular products, are all competitive US industries, at least until the Koreans and the Chinese started dumping more steel as the Chinese construction industry slowed. So let me take a few minutes and talk about a study we did when I was at the Aspen Institute, co-sponsored by the Manufacturers Alliance and involving the University of Maryland. I collaborated with Don Norman of MAPI, who some of you know, leading energy economist, and Jeff Whirling of the University of Maryland, director of Inforum. We looked at the impact of the ban on crude oil exports on the manufacturing sector. This Nixon-era ban has become anachronistic due to the fracking revolution, which is producing record amounts of light crudes that cannot be easily handled by US refiners. And as long as the regulatory constraints on new refinery production or expansion exist, we're not likely to see a big change in this for the moment. We projected that lifting the export ban could increase exports by several million barrels a day and hence give a boost to the manufacturing sector. The important point was to see how much such a hypothetical growth path could impact the manufacturing sector as a whole. I'll return later to the current situation where prices of crude obviously make such a projection unrealistic at this time. So we employed Inforum's long-term interdisciplinary forecasting tool, or LIFT model, to model the impacts of increase in oil production, which would be associated with opening up exports. The model is a dynamic equilibrium model which combines an interdisciplinary input-output formulation with extensive use of regression analysis to create a bottoms-up approach to macroeconomic modeling. We had a high and a low export path. I'm going to simplify the presentation by reporting some results, mostly from the high export path, in which exports grow at a rate of around 2 million barrels today at the end of our 10-year forecasting period. Much of the impact of what we found from our scenario modeling comes from the incremental investment needed to develop the fields, transportation, and export infrastructure to accommodate such a large increase in production. Capital expenditure would have incremental growth of $60 to $80 billion in the early years of our projection period up to about 2021, and $40 to $60 billion in the out years after fields and infrastructure had largely been put in place. The macro impacts of our high growth scenario are significant. GDP is higher by almost 1% in peak years, which 2019 to 2021, and level off at about 0.75% of GDP, or $141 billion a year by 2025. A peak of 630,000 jobs are created in 2019. Real household income is up by $2,000 to $3,000 by 2025, and wages are up by a little bit over 1%. The micro impacts on manufacturing are material as well. Overall production of durable goods is up by 1.4% by 2017. Machinery alone is up by 3.3%. Agriculture, mining, and construction equipment is higher by 6% in the same year. Jobs in mining, which include oil and gas, grow an average of 43,000 in the 10-year period we model. Importantly, related professional services jobs increased by an average of 148,000 per year to 2025. Of course, the U.S. refinery sector does not obviously seem, is not unaffected by this. We see an impact from higher exports. Our model shows that capital expenditures in the refinery sector are lower by some $1 billion per year in 2020 from our baseline projection. So to return to the current situation, the downturn in global crude prices, aided and abetted by our Saudi allies, has had a major impact on current activity. But macroeconomic forces such as the strong dollar and weakness of both developed and developing economies, especially China, has reinforced the deflationary impact of higher U.S. production. In turn, such weakness puts a damper on growth in manufacturing as a whole. Again, to look at the impact directly of the slowdown in drilling activity, oil and gas drilling has declined by 56% according to the Fed industrial production data. Overall manufacturing production, as a result of both the oil and gas collapse, at least in drilling, and related macro forces, has slowed to 0.4% growth year to year as of September. Subsectors of manufacturing show more clearly the impact of the downturn in oil and gas. Total shipments of oil and gas machinery are down by 43% in the last 12 months. Overall production of agriculture, mining, and oil and gas equipment is 13% below its recent peak, and primary metals are 7% below their recent peak. About 100,000 jobs in the mining and mining support services sector have disappeared in the last year. 15,000 jobs in the machinery sector and 6,000 in primary metals have been lost in the same period. Of course, again, I reiterate that not all of these effects are uniquely due to the slowdown in the oil patch, but clearly it's had a major impact on overall growth, especially in manufacturing. So lifting the ban on crude oil exports, we argued, is one way to a longer-term reversal of the current trends and would be of considerable benefit to the manufacturing sector. The study we produced, along with similar studies from NERA, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, and others, gives a good idea of the magnitude of the potential impact. Just a week or two ago, the House of Representatives in Washington passed a bill to end the crude oil export ban, and the Senate is expected to address the issue before the end of the year. Other measures could, of course, add to the effects of this single bill, such as reducing the regulatory burdens on land use and drilling, and an oil investment in refining capacity. So, in summary, there's a very good case on policy grounds to end the oil export ban, and the economic case is even more compelling, especially when the impact on manufacturing resurgence is calibrated. This latter sector has helped lead the recovery since 2009, has regained some of the competitive edge lost since the 1970s. Increasing oil and associated gas production will add to the competitive gains and create thousands of good-paying jobs, not the least of which are what we used to call blue-collar jobs for those without higher levels of education. Although skilled jobs in engineering and technical services also benefit mightily from growth in this sector. Technically advanced sectors of U.S. manufacturing, such as construction, equipment, engines and turbines, and mining equipment are world leaders and pillars of the future U.S. growth, and growth in these sectors is materially dependent on the oil and gas sector. Hopefully the choices made by our democracy will reflect an understanding of the economic and geopolitical impacts that seem relatively clear, as well as the socio-political factors which often drown out the economic arguments. So, thank you very much.
I've heard a lot of similar numbers about manufacturing has suffered as a result of oil. But this is an interesting oil downturn, because when we look at previous oil downturns, they tended to coincide, maybe not the one in 85, 86, but they tended to coincide with a weaker economy. This then is with the economy that's okay, and part of me thinks, well, okay, the price of oil is down, that should be more for the rest of the economy. How is the rest of the manufacturing sector doing? If you're able to strip out oil, isn't this beneficial for the overall economy? Are you seeing it in some of the people who are members of your association?
I'll just give you one number that appeared last year, or earlier this year. Goldman Sachs did a little study on capital investment, and they indicated that because of the downdraft in the oil and gas exploration and development sector, overall capital investment in the United States would be 50% lower than it otherwise would have been. So, and I've observed and argued for a long time that the principal strength of U.S. manufacturing has become capital goods. The durable goods sector has led the recovery. Non-durables, except for chemicals, have been flat to lower. And this is all in the context of an era, again, of a strong dollar, which is pretty recent, which is severely dampened export competitiveness again. And you have a slowdown in Asia, especially China, which induces exports back into the world markets of overproduced goods in China. And it's not only metals, but other machinery and the like. So we're at a time when there are a lot of factors conspiring to weaken manufacturing. Oil and gas is very, very important. There's other stuff going on as well.
For some fabricated metal products, there might be an easing of those constraints, but certainly not for the bigger things like pressure vessels and the process control equipment that's needed.
I'd like to comment. A year ago or so, I was down to Pittsburgh Economic Club, and the local banks gave a macroeconomic forecast, and this was 2 months after the collapse of oil prices from $100 a barrel to $45 a barrel. And there was unanimity that it would add 1% to GDP growth in the United States. That hasn't happened, or if it has happened, the rest of the economy is even slower than anticipated. So from a consumer point of view, you think that low oil prices are going to be good for GDP growth. That has yet to occur, which seems to imply to me that the answer to the question of whether there's going to be a resurgence is really a macroeconomic policy question. And right now we don't have the growth. What has to happen for that growth to resume to be at 3% levels? In the EIA forecast, the base case growth is 2.5%, which we have barely attained in the last 5 years in the United States. For every year to 2040, the high growth case is about 3% per year for every year to 2040. And if you have both high growth and low commodity prices, then you would expect to see all of this 40 TCF a year economy come to fruition. But if we remain stagnant, that's not going to happen.
I just had a quick question for Martha. This database that you have, is this generally available, or is this available by subscription, or how does that work? Or only members of your association, or what?
If anybody wants a copy of I can provide the list of projects that we are tracking and the locations. I can provide that to anybody who would like to have it. You can contact me here or email me. I'm happy to share that with anybody. We do not post it online, but it is readily available through our economics department. The underlying details we do not share. We've got a lot of estimates, and our members may not want us putting those out there.
Martin Sturmer from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Two questions for Martha. First is, do you see an impact of the strong dollar on these projects that are coming online? The second question is, what's the effect of these low energy prices on innovative activity in the chemical sector? Do you have any examples for that, or has there been a pickup of R&D expenditure in this sector?
I'll start with your second question, which is I'm not sure. I haven't really been tracking that. That's an interesting question. Yeah, there's been some talk of there's a correlation between capital expenditures and R&D. You build out and then you do a lot of research and development. That's a part of my research agenda for next year, actually. With respect to your first question, in terms of the high dollar, that's certainly impacting the industry to some degree. Some would argue that the dollar is more of a short-term effect. As soon as Europe is starting to recover, right now the U.S. is the hottest game in town, and we've got a potential interest rate hike, and that's why one of the reasons that the dollar is so very strong. These chemical plants are being planned for 20, 30-year lifetimes, so I'm not sure that they're really capturing or taking into account exchange rate fluctuations. I think it's more of a short-term phenomenon, and I doubt it's really part of their thinking.
Dave Schmalzer, Oregon National Lab. The question I had, on your slide, you were showing this sort of peak of capital expenditures around 2017. I was curious whether you might attribute that to sort of feedstock availability from the upstream section, or whether it's sort of a market pushback, the ability of the market to absorb, particularly like ethylene units, typically come in billion plus pound a year increments, and we've seen sort of historically when one of these billion-pound a year units comes online, it sort of impacts everybody else and sort of pushes them back.
So the chart I showed was the wave of investment. So 2017 is the peak year of building activity and the dollars going in the ground, so to speak. And then after 2017 is when we really start to see ramp-ups in expected production of petrochemicals and basic chemicals. To your question about, a lot of these world-scale ethylene plants, and there's 6 that are going in the ground right now, they're usually 1.5 million tons per year capacity. Very, very large amounts of ethylene coming online. And to the extent that you're talking about the world market? Or maybe I misunderstood the question.
To some extent it's a world market, but it's also a question of, particularly if you have this newer capacity coming online in sort of the Appalachian period, the downstream capabilities to absorb it. Like I say, the capacity seems to come, because of the economics of ethylene units, just come very big.
Right.
You don't get, a 500 million pounds of capacity. You get 1 billion pounds or 2 billion pounds. And so, and oftentimes say a newer plant will have lower operating costs than an older plant. So my question really was, do you see issues in absorbing that new capacity? I know you're showing downstream investment.
Right.
I'm curious, how do you see that unfolding?
Right. Well, and part of the investment that's happening in 2017 and years on is in those derivative projects. And that was a point I was trying to make, is we've had these ethylene crackers that were announced, these massive quantities of ethylene coming online. You're going to have the derivative projects coming in to soak that up. Certainly in the 6 ethylene crackers that are currently under construction, all of those are down in the Gulf Coast. The ones in the Appalachian region have not yet reached final investment decisions. There's one that may be having a final investment decision the next month or 2. And I think once we see that with respect to the Appalachian region, then we'll start to see a lot of the other downstream players making commitments. It's one of those, who's going to move first, and it's not quite an if you build it, they will come, but somebody needs to move first, and then I think the rest of the pieces will start to fall into place.
I think what you're saying, Dave, is replicated in other industries. Just upriver, about 20 miles, is a very large rolling mill that Allegheny Technologies put in, which is based on a natural gas process to make specialty steel. Its first impact is going to be impacting central Pennsylvania forgers negatively. But whether it's a growth in overall manufacturing GDP, which depends on the global market, and it's again a global GDP story.
Yes, this is a comment on Martha's projections. If you look at the data for 2015, industrial demand for natural gas is for a fact, the actual number is lower than any estimates in the whole industry. Despite the fact that we have inflation in all the products that we show. So as a natural gas producer, if we build all those projects and yet industrial demand in September, year over year, decline. So where is the effect of that on natural gas? That's number one. Number two, we know for a fact that because of low gas prices, producers are moving from one place to right place, which means that the NGL production is decline, and the movement of those foreign companies to access those NGLs is the unequally big. So how does it play for that forecast? And the third point is, what if the Saudis agree with the maximum oil prices are marketing the idea that after the market share improves, but the reality they really want to protect their industry. What if they want oil at $38 and natural gas at $1.90? How that scenario can play?
That's a lot of questions. All right, to start with your first, I guess, well, the plants aren't built yet. So 2015, industrial demand for natural gas, that doesn't surprise me that it's down somewhat. Natural gas, those energy-intensive, natural gas-intensive industries, not only chemicals, but other manufacturing, a lot of that is export-oriented, and with weak external markets and the strong value of the dollar, some of those industries have not performed well this year. I mean, in terms of future looking, I've got a back-of-the-envelope estimate that if you build all these projects, the incremental natural gas demand is something close to 2.9 BCF per day. It's in that neighborhood, depending on different technologies that companies may be using, et cetera. So I think the demand will be there, certainly from the chemical sector. I would defer to Peter on everybody else. With respect to NGLs, the question was, you are looking for a decline in NGL production or just a decline in the growth rate of NGL production? There's not as much NGLs, but you're getting NGLs from some of those dry places as well. I think it's more the growth rate, which has been very, very steep, will maybe level out. I would ask others in the audience who may have more expertise about actual production declines in NGL. But right now we're rejecting a ton of ethane. I've seen estimates of 250 barrels per day is getting rejected. Some of that will get soaked up from exports. Most of it will get soaked up from the cracker projects when those come online. But we're still anticipating growth in NGLs. I don't know that that's not wise. I have not heard that. And remind me again your final question about Saudi.
Final one, what if you have a scenario where oil prices are 58 and gas is 190? Today we are almost $2.
Okay, so yeah, that would impact that oil to gas ratio, but natural gas, yeah, I mean, I think we would still be.
That's equivalent of $100 oil and $5 gas. Gas is still very competitive at that point.
Yeah. I
think it would affect the different feedstock advantages within the chemical industry.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
It takes one or the other.
$1.90 gas and $38
Right.
crude is not on the surface devastating to gas.
No. I think, yeah, it would still be competitive in that situation.
Any other questions? I have a question on the workforce. So you were talking about how you need skilled workers. Now, are these engineers, or are we talking about what people call blue tech workers? Where you sort of get the community colleges and technical colleges. I know you got. What is the chemical industry doing to sort of
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, we're looking for skilled workers across all levels, mechanics, machinists, CNC controllers. Again, that falls into that blue tech category. But there's also going to be, additional need for all kinds of engineers: chemical engineers, quality engineers, safety engineers, mechanical, electrical. There's going to be huge demand for STEM-trained workers at all levels. Chemical companies are partnering with VOTEC colleges, or community colleges, to develop programs specific to their manufacturing needs. So they're trying to get these folks to do these programs, to graduate from those programs. They've got employment opportunities on the horizon there. So it's a partnership between the companies and the community colleges and VOTEC colleges to develop those specific skills that those companies are looking for.
I would add, if I may, that locally that's been a big push by the regional politicians and the regional educational establishments to work with local drillers and energy users to develop curricula to train people for essentially vocational careers that will be higher wage careers than otherwise.
I could just add a little bit. I mean, it's a broader question than just the chemicals industry. Obviously, we don't, if we wanted to revive the nuclear industry, if that's ever going to happen, we have to rebuild an entire construction workforce for that. If we wanted to rebuild the Navy, we don't have the skilled workers, the pipe fitters and the welders that know how to do that work. When German car companies come to this country, which they've been coming in bigger and bigger numbers, the Japanese as well, they often go to places where they can develop vocational education or apprenticeship type programs in conjunction with local community colleges or even high schools, or set up their own programs. So I think it's a broader problem than people would fess up to.
Yes, a follow-up question also for Martha. Do you have statistics on the workforce that is being sort of imported from places like India, for example, that can fill those blue tech jobs, or do they not qualify with the visa requirements that we have?
We don't have that level of detail, and I'm not even sure where, if that might exist. Yeah, the H1B Visa program. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what types of skills come in under that. I know that there's tremendous pressure, that the H1B visas fill up, very, very quickly. That's another policy issue that I'm not going to get into. But yeah, that's been one of the proposals suggested, is that we could import those types of skills from other parts of the world.
Do you have any other questions?
Well, this may be redundant, but the German car makers, again, will bring in trainers from their own apprenticeship programs to teach teachers in the United States the skills like mechatronics and other things that they are looking for. And these are longer term imports of these workers, 6 months or so. It's again because we not only don't have the workers, we don't have the educators to begin these programs and sustain these programs.
All right, please, let's thank our panel for the great
Check. That's the place to check. I need to hit this button 1 second.
Okay.